the most current published land use map, I cannot attest to whether or not it includes amendments that have been made since April 10th of 2012. I have not done that research, hadn't been asked to do that research. I suspect there may be a few amendments that are probably not reflected on this, and that would be something we would we want to have the staff take a look at. One thing that I want to clarify is the proposed land use map is not the zoning of a property. Has nothing, well, I won't say has nothing to do with zoning, but it's not the zoning designation of the property. The proposed land use map is an assessment of generally multiple parcels. You're looking at like a corridor or an area of the city or a quadrant of the city, and you're making a general, you being the planning commission, is making a general, I guess, plan based on current infrastructure and proposed future infrastructure or desired infrastructure of what might be the highest and best use of a particular area of a particular land. A lot of communities entitle the what you have as a proposed land use map as a future land use map. Those proposed and future, some would argue those are interchangeable. Some would argue each of them has their own inferences. Proposed land use might infer to someone that that's what's being sought, or actively sought after, but that's not necessarily the case. This is the proposed or future land use map is a general observation of an area that and how its best and highest use of that particular area, that particular parcel. It is very much a fluid document based on development patterns. It is very much a document that I would suggest to you that does not have strongly rigid boundaries. So, if you have, for instance, the purple here is medium density residential, and the yellow here is low density residential. And any, distinction line there between the two, again, it was established at some point for a given reason, but to have it bleed over, and that goes for any of these, have them bleed over 3 or 4 parcels, as a result of development patterns is a common thing amongst communities in Middle Tennessee. Where some of the more rigid delineations come into play, you're starting to talk about physical features that may separate, certain land uses, rivers, creeks, bluffs, those types of physical land features. Another somewhat more rigid delineation would be your infrastructure. If there was a limiting, if you could only go so far north with wastewater service or with solid waste collection, which I know Fairview doesn't provide that, but just an example of services or infrastructure, then that would limit that particular area or that corridor to a lower density or a less intensive land use, then that might be something to take into consideration when making kind of some rigid boundaries. Any requests for rezoning property, one of the first things that should be done is to look at the proposed or future land use map and say, okay, at some point in the past when there wasn't a specific application, It was believed that this area was desirous to be what on the future land use map? And does that coincide with what, does a medium density residential designation on the proposed land use map, does this proposed rezoning from RS40 to R20, does that still comply with medium density? And in your case, that specific example, yes, it would. R20 would be considered a medium density residential zone as defined in your book, not by any one individual, but as defined in the subregs. And so therefore, one of the comments from the staff would be that this proposed rezoning complies with the proposed or future land use map.
And what if it doesn't comply?
If it doesn't comply, then it needs to be discussed. And if the desire by the Planning Commission is to rezone the property, then along with that concurrently, then there would need to be an amendment to the land use map that would reflect that rezoning that would be outside or different from what's reflected on the future land use map.
And the Planning Commission has the ability to do that according to a land use map that might need to change because of some specific situation.
Correct, yeah, the Planning Commission has full authority over the land use map, future land use map. Board of Commissioners has full authority over rezoning. So what I've seen in other communities take place is Planning Commission might recommend or have a negative recommendation to the City Council or Board of Commissioners for specific rezoning because it doesn't meet the land use plan. Well, the Board of Commissioners, they take that recommendation under advisement, but they're not bound by that recommendation. Zoning is an ordinance level document that requires Board of Commissioners approval to change a zoning of the property. And so I've seen instances where Planning Commissions recommend a negative or to deny zoning. The applicant requests that it continue to the City Council, which they have the right to do, with a negative recommendation, and then the Board of Commissioners, City Council chooses to authorize that rezoning. And so then Planning Commission, as a result, would need to revise or amend their future land use plan based on the action that was taken by the City Council or Board of Commissioners, whatever the agency is.
And vice versa also applies?
No.
Okay.
If you can amend the future land use plan and not have any zonings in front of you at all. Like if you chose to want to do a corridor study of 96 from 100 to the interstate, and what do we see that looking like in the future based on today's trends, then you could do that. You could make an amendments to that land use map, future land use map, and you'd rock and roll, and there's no zoning necessarily changes that would be required as a result of changing that. You're just saying, based on trends and patterns and infrastructure availability, we view this future corridor to look something like this. This is where we see commercial, this is where we see industrial, this is where we see low-density residential, high-density residential, and kind of go through a study or work session, something along those lines. Does that answer your question?
So legally, if we find a pertinent situation, we can change the land use map.
Sure, absolutely.
And if we decide to change something, the board can either go along with us or they can not.
From a rezoning standpoint, yes.
Rezoning.
Yeah. From the future land use map, there's no board oversight. And that's not just a Fairview thing, that's true across all municipalities. Planning commissions have full authority over future land use map.
Because sometimes if a land use map is designed in the future, there could be a reason why we wouldn't stick with it and we'd go with something different. But,
sure.
What I've heard, from the public is they don't understand why we have a land use map and we choose sometimes to change it.
Right.
So I would like them to understand that there are reasons why,
Yeah.
we decide to change it.
Will, could I add something?
Sure.
Yes.
The reason that you don't have to change the land use map before you'd adopt or recommend a zoning is this. You might choose to recommend to rezone something. You've already changed your land use map. You're assuming this is going to go through. Excuse me, then it goes to the Board of Commissioners, and for whatever reason, they decide they're not going to rezone it. Then you've got a land use map that's incorrect because your zoning didn't go through. And to be current, you'd have to go back and change your land use map. So if something comes in, and patterns of cities change, what they thought when this was done in 2012 might not be what this particular board thinks. So they changed the land use map to reflect the current trends, and then all they can do, you don't have to present that to the Board of Commissioners. It's the land use map has changed. Now, the land use map does have some strong indications. If this board or the planning commission decides they're not going to recommend this zoning because of the land use map, it varies, and you want to keep that, says we want to stay that way. Now, you can't be arbitrary and capricious. You can't decide we're going to do this one and then one comes in right next to it and we're going to recommend it. You've got to do it fairly. Now, by that I don't mean that it never changes, but you've got to do it fairly. But you send that up to the Board of Commissioners, and they approve it, and the land use map shows that particular type of usage, you're in good shape. But as Will said a minute ago, if you send one up recommending non-approval, and the Board of Commissioners accepts the zoning and approves it, they have by implication changed the land use map to grant that zoning, although they don't have any direct control of the land use map. A result of their legislative authority to do the zoning, they have said this is proper use. But remember that when you do that, if you're not going to stay fairly close to your land use map, then you need to change it. If you see all these coming in and it should be something different, then change the land use map. But the reason I say it does have a lot of power. Let's say that you're fairly and equitably applying your land use map. Here's what it says it is. I submit something and you recommend against it and the board approves it. If that's the only thing in and of itself that turns down the zoning, there is cases that went up on appeal where the Court of Appeals and the state Supreme Court said, we're not going to substitute our judgment for the Planning Commission's judgment who studied that area. If that's the only reason you denied it, then the courts have upheld that. So it behooves you to do a good job with it because you don't want to get to be in an arbitrary capricious situation. But if it's something that seems to be what you want to do and the board upholds it, then the courts have upheld it in several cases.
And sure, and also too, the proposed land use map or future land use map, it does not include the same designations as your zoning ordinance or your zoning map. The land use map is a much broader, some communities, they'll just separate it into 3 categories: industrial, commercial, and residential. And that's all their proposed or future land use map shows. So they don't specify high density residential or any specific type of commercial. They just say this general area, we feel its highest and best use is for commercial at some point in the future. Now, it may today exist as row houses or apartments or old subdivision that was built in the 40s, and that's fine. That's okay to have that discrepancy because the map doesn't say existing land use map, it's the future land use map and what we desire for this particular area to develop as in the future. For instance, I think in reviewing some of the research and records on this, I know at some point there was a desire from the Planning Commission, and this has been several years ago, there was a desire to not have commercial land uses all along 100 for fear that it might turn into a Nolensville and Antioch, where it's just a strict commercial all the way down, and that there were pockets of the Purple's residential. There's pockets of residential up and down certain sections of 100 on the proposed land use map. That sentiment or that desire may have changed, and is certainly an allowable adjustment or amendment, you know, to change if that's how you see, because quite frankly, there's very few state highways running through municipalities that aren't predominantly commercial on both sides. I mean, that's just the nature of state highway access lends itself to commercial land uses along that corridor. Not saying that's what you have to do or what you need to do, but that's generally what you would see. So.
Well, I have a question. Did I hear you say the proposed land use map and the future land use map?
No.
They're all the same document, right?
Correct. Fairview just has a proposed land use map.
Okay.
That's all there is officially in Fairview. Some communities call that document a future land use map instead of a proposed land use map. So it's the same it embodies the same information, it's just a different title. Semantics at that point, basically.
Well, how often should that be updated? I know you said it hadn't been said since 2012, so.
Yeah.
Should we update it every year, every 2 years?
Well, a good rule of thumb is you can certainly do updates on a regular basis, or at least a review of it to see, is there anything we want to address? Most communities piecemeal it together. I'm not saying that's the best approach, but most communities will get to a point where they're starting to see more regularly requests to amend their future land use map. And that's when I tell communities, say, look, if you started noticing over the past 6, 12, 18 months that you're getting a large number of requests for amendments to your future land use map, maybe that's telling us that the trends are different than what was there when the map was previously overhauled or whatever. And a lot of communities, some will take the approach of, okay, if you get one in, then let's not only look at that. If you get one request in to amend the land use map, let's not just look at that one parcel. Let's look at the general area as they come in and say, is this general area something that we desire to change, and not just this singular parcel with this specific rezoning request.
I'll look into how many requests we've had since 2012 and sort of make a judgment from there.
I don't recall very many since I've been here.
Since 2014, I don't either.
I want to say maybe half a dozen
I think
at
it's-
most.
I think it's one.
Okay.
What John said.
Yeah.
I thought it was about one.
So it hasn't happened a lot.
Yeah.
I feel like the 2 years I've been sitting up here, the only one would be that recent apartment out
Right.
by the interstate, which
Right.
could technically fit into commercial, but that's another discussion. What would we have to do to get this active, to represent the changes we have made since 2012? If we, approved an adjustment to the land use map for, say, the apartment area, to get an active breathing document to where we can have it presented to potential developers coming out, they can see our growth plan, they can see what our vision is, just so when they come to us, they've seen it, they know what that area would be, what our ideal plan would be.
I think we can get it on the website to let them kind of know where it's at. And I think that'd be a good idea to put it on the website.
And try and, if it's possible, to capture, like we have, the industrial general drawn in up
Right.
there, if there's a way to show it active on, as part of that map, the right color.
Yeah, I mean, we can,
Do we have the ability to do that here, or does?
no.
No, ma'am.
Okay.
I'll have to find a source that can do that for us and then get it to the website.
Isn't on our website now.
No, sir. No, sir.
I think when you get that source too, with the assets that are available now, they could probably capture a few more land features, road names and stuff like this so that you can better get your bearings as to where you are.
It's very hard to make them out on there, even with magnifying glasses.
We couldn't, when we passed it last time, it was very difficult to read, period. Some of that stuff was on there. And part of the problem that we had the last time was just like spot zoning. You're not supposed to spot zone something necessarily just for doing it. But on 96 and 100, especially on 100, you've got several, let's just say, Jingle Market, or prior to that, actually, you come on out and you've got Sullivan's Place right through there. You got 2 or 3 places that are commercial, then you get to the house on the corner, it's in here on purpose, so it can't be, it's not commercial. It has to be residential, it has to be amended or approved something else. And the question came up at that time, I don't know who else was on the board, well, you tell us what you're gonna build and we'll let you know. They either wanna go into zone commercial or not zone commercial. I'd like to see it cleaned up and cut out some of these pockets that you got. Just for people to look at it when it's coming through. They decide they want to have it, 10 lots or 20 lots for residential, that's fine, it doesn't make a difference, but people need to know what's going on, you shouldn't be spotting out one piece of property.
These maps, as best I can tell, were created by the state planning office, which is defunct now, it's no longer,
Yes, sir.
I mean, they closed. Governor Haslam, a year or two into his first term, made the decision that the local planning office, the state's local planning office, that those services could be rendered more effectively by the private sector. So he disbanded that office, and they provided, among other things, they provided GIS mapping services to a number of different communities across the state, not just Fairview. And then I believe Mr. Lavorne had a pretty good working relationship with Williamson County's GIS department, and was able to make some updates through them using their software and their capabilities to not only this but the zoning map as well. And we're trying to Mr. Hall's trying to reestablish that relationship with the county and utilizing that database and that mapping service. We've had a couple discussions with them on getting that reestablished, and I think that's a positive, looking to be a positive potential there.
Yes, sir, and also the Water Authority of Dixon needs that same information too.
Right. And my firm could provide that, but the county can do it a lot cheaper than we can do it for you. So certainly I would, suggested to Mr. Hall to pursue the county's option first, certainly, if at all possible. So.
Wayne, didn't we also have some input desired from the gas company at the time we did it, as far as needing updates on this right here?
Yes, sir. They're another agency that could use that also.
Is the CAD software available to do that, like, for a city to do their own?
Oh, yeah, certainly. You could purchase the ArcGIS software. I wouldn't suggest doing it on CAD. You can, but I don't think that's not the most efficient and doesn't provide you the most utilization or utility aspects of mapping. Any geospatial type mapping, my suggestion is it needs to be done with GIS software, either ArcGIS, ArcView, something along those lines. And that allows you a couple things. One, it allows you the ability to, whoever has the software and the data files, database files, it allows you pretty good flexibility to make tweaks and changes on the fly. But it also allows you to integrate with other GIS databases. So like the base map for this is the tax map. And so the county property assessor on Williamson County and all other counties, they update their base map on an annual basis. So when you have a new subdivision come in with 50 lots and say this previously undeveloped parcel, or however many, just pick a number, then if you're using the tax map base as your base map, then when it updates through the county property assessor's office, then it would bring in all those new lot lines and those new property boundaries, and so you're utilizing the most current division of land map that's available. You can also bring in layers of utilities and, you know, your zoning, and so a lot of communities, I mean, it's really, really amazing, the technology that's out there, but it's very useful for recruiting industries and businesses. An industry comes to sit down with Mr. Hall, and if he has the ability to go into his GIS, open his GIS program, and this particular person says, Mr. Hall, I need 50 acres. I need it within a mile of the interchange, and I need it to have 8-inch water line and or a fire hydrant next to it and sewer service. Then he can go through and click those, and it'll show him, okay, I don't have any properties like that. What's your next best? Or it'll say, it'll pinpoint, here's the 3 properties that meet that criteria. Won't you and I go look at them? If you're going to plan on bringing 200 jobs in, you know, we'll go eat lunch and we'll see what's out there. So it's an amazing tool, and it has a cost. I'm not here to debate or pitch or anything like that, but it's a tremendous mapping tool, that software is, and there's nothing proprietary. There's plenty of vendors out there that have that capability. But that would be my suggestion. If you're looking to bring it in-house, I would suggest, and maybe one thing you might look at in a qualifications for a future planning or codes director is some GIS background, at least a cursory understanding of that it exists and that it can be useful for a useful tool for land planning.
I don't know, maybe you can help me, Vice Mayor. I know Don had something in one of the budgets at one time. Do you know, Will, were you around?
I don't.
Is that what he was looking?
Yeah, I'd picked up on some of it from Don, but never was intimate with what he was looking for. But I do know at one point, when he had that relationship with the county, I think he did explore pricing out, getting the software in-house.
And somebody part-time to input it.
And that's a key factor. It's not just, you can't just buy the software and it automatically does it. You got to have somebody in-house that can utilize it, and knows how to utilize it.
And did you say what the cost was?
We've actually priced out the newest version and recently, and of course, like anything else, you can get as many bells and whistles, or you can get, the bare bones. And Mayor, I want to say, don't hold me to this, but you're looking in the range of 10 to 20,000 is kind of that, I think, is what you're looking at. Of course, some of it, if you just want one seat or one license, you might be able to get it a little cheaper, that sort of thing.
County GIS is, Winston County's got a good,
Yeah.
I like theirs.
And eventually, what you can integrate that onto your city website, and just people can click on, and they can they can pull up an interactive map through your website based on the GIS maps that have been uploaded, and not just a PDF scan or copy of this or a zoning map or something like that.
Mayor,
Yes.
Will had stated earlier about me contacting the county. I actually went to Ms. Wheeler, which is Roger's secretary, and she got us the name of who we can contact. And Will, I think you've been in touch with him already, haven't you?
I have.
Yeah, so when we find out what costs we'll have from the county, I hope it can be an interlocal agreement, which will be a lot less than having to go forward with an outside service.
Yeah, my biggest fear though is what Will was saying is, will we have anybody that can utilize it right now? I mean, as far as timing, not that that we could even do it in this year's budget because it's not budgeted for, but, you know, it'd be great to have, but, you know, if we are gonna utilize it is the biggest question for me. But, I mean, I can look at it and say, yeah, that would be neat, and it would be a nice service, you know, for people coming in to the community. And really help us when we have the different businesses looking to relocate.
Might not have to tour as much.
Huh?
We might not have to tour as much.
Yeah, really.
Give tours.
Well, we like that, remember?
Yes, ma'am.
If you've never used the county's GIS system, you ought to try it, because it's user-friendly. It's real hard to get through it and use it, and it's a real good site.
And you, I mean, you start adding inventory. Well, here's another thing that'll be intriguing. You're approaching a population of 10,000. 10,000 is the magic threshold that TDEC has set to mandate cities that are of 10,000 population or greater. You have to be permitted under the municipal stormwater permitting procedures. MS4 is what it's called. And so one of the things that's required by the state in that MS4 program is a mapping of your stormwater system, all your culverts, all your inlet catch basins, all your discharges, where your streams are located. And so if you had, you know, GIS in place, you take a handheld, it's more than a Garmin that you can go get at Walmart, but you take a handheld GPS unit and you go pick up these points and you bring it into your software, and it spatially places them where they're supposed to be. You can identify the culvert size, the culvert material, the general condition that it's in, and that gives you an inventory. And you can inventory anything within the city like that. So, you know, if your fire department needed hydrant locations, which I'm sure they have on a static map, but if they needed hydrant locations, and last time it was flow tested and the flow test results, then, you know, you can have icons within that software. Fire department get on there and just scroll over, and a little window pops up, says this was the date it was tested, this was the flow, this was the pressure. And so, I mean, there's anything that is spatially on a map, you can tie information to it, and it'll be tied to that icon or that pipe or whatever it is, and you can scroll through it, and that information is constantly married to that item until you change it or unmarry it, divorce it.
So basically, somebody, because that's, you know, always going to be one of your biggest complaints with the development coming in. So basically, we could do prior to the development and take those numbers and submit, and then go back and tell after if, hey, there really is runoff, or is that not really?
You could. I was thinking more potable water, because
Okay.
that's a more easily measurable item. Stormwater, yes. I mean, they have flow meters for stormwater in ditches, and you can create weirs and you can get calculations on stuff. So, yeah, you could do something along those lines.
Looking at the time we have, we need to move on to number 2, discuss traffic studies.
This is the section in the subregs on traffic studies, traffic impact studies. Section 4-105.2. I think the linchpin of kind of what brought this about was not necessarily the individual threshold of what type of development requires a traffic study, but maybe more so the concern of the aggregate result of a number of developments, maybe along the same corridor, that individually didn't meet the threshold of requiring a traffic study, but collectively, would require, would certainly meet the threshold. So I think that's kind of how we've gotten to where we are today. And you'll see the very first paragraph there outlines 4 criteria or thresholds for requiring traffic studies. Any development with more than 100 dwelling units, and this is an automatic yes, that's required. A non-residential development of more than 50,000 square feet, so commercial industrial development of a 50,000 square foot building. And that could be, that's one of your areas that could stand to be, add some clarity. The third one is a combination of residential and non-residential uses that would expected to generate 1,000 vehicle trips or more per day, or 100 peak hour trips, or in the opinion of the city engineer, a traffic impact study is needed. The last one generally is going to fall under the criteria of, are we in the bend of a road? Are there some site visualization issues? Are there some known, have we had an ordinary number of traffic accidents at a specific intersection, and of course we would need to rely on police reports and police department on that type of information. But generally that's what's been needed. Historically, we just tried to shy away from, if there's not something unique like that, just saying, yeah, I think you need a traffic study. That can be pretty arbitrary at times. So I guess the first question would be, do you desire to lower any of those individual thresholds whereby an automatic traffic study would be required? While you're thinking about that, let me talk a little bit about traffic studies. A lot of the feedback I hear across a number of communities is, well, if the developer's paying for the traffic study, then it's going to say nothing's needed because he's paying for it. He doesn't want to make any improvements. Okay, I would combat that by saying the traffic study must be done by a licensed professional traffic engineer, civil engineer. He must stamp that report, so he's putting his professional license on the line. And there are industry standards published by traffic databases and traffic state transportation departments, the Federal Highway Administration. There are standards that are published on how to conduct a traffic study, what would require improvements, whether it's turning lanes, shoulders, signalized intersections, median divides, speed limits. So I think that particular concern, I feel comfortable combating that concern with those items that I just stated. And so then it becomes a matter of the city deciding on if we're going to, which I would recommend, we take the traffic study for face value for those reasons I just stated. And then it becomes a matter of when and how do we want to require those traffic studies to be conducted? What are the thresholds you want to set?
Can you tell us about who is in charge of determining where and if a traffic light is needed?
That's a loaded question.
I know, but I think a lot of people ask that question,
Yeah.
and I think they think like we can make that decision.
Right.
And that's why I want, the community to know that it's not our decision to make.
Yes and no. on state highways, 196, you don't have the authority to override TDOT. You do have the authority to approach TDOT and request a light, or request a study be done by TDOT to determine the necessity of a light. If TDOT determines that a light is needed, most of the time, if their study reveals a traffic signal is needed, they'll pay for it, most of the time. If a traffic study that they conduct reveals that it's not needed and the city still desires for one to be there, assuming that there's no public safety issues on TDOT's side, they may allow a light to go in there if the city pays for the entirety of the installation of the light. Lights with mast poles, meaning there's no wires across, there's a pole at the corner, vertical pole at the corner, and then there's an arm that comes out of it, which is what everybody likes to see aesthetically instead of a bunch of cords across the intersections. Those can range anywhere from $100,000 to $250,000. So most communities, if the traffic study doesn't warrant it by TDOT, is probably not going to come up with the money to install those lights. On city streets, the city does have the authority to put a light up on any city street that they desire. Again, I would strongly recommend that follow industry standards in determining if a signalized intersection is needed or warranted. And that way you have the backing of professional documentation. If there were an accident at that intersection after it was signalized, you've got the backing of a document that said that signalization was warranted. There are some instances where you might be, at risk, the city might be at risk by just installing a light there because somebody wanted it there. And then an accident occurs, and then, well, why was that light installed to begin with? Did anybody study the need for that light? Did anybody study the ramifications of how that might affect traffic flow or an intersection? And then, so that would be on existing streets. On new streets or new intersections where you have a new development coming in, then that would be dictated, the need for a light at a new intersection or an existing intersection would be dictated by the traffic study that would be conducted here. And if the traffic study that was conducted as a result of a new development revealed that a light would be needed, my suggestion is always that developer is responsible for the cost of the installation of that light. So that's kind of where we are with that.
Well, and to give an example, like Cox Pike and Cumberland, we requested traffic studies at least 2 times since I've been around, and maybe actually 3. The 3rd time was when we got Cox Pike, and then they still, and you talk about Cumberland, it just blows our mind to think that they didn't think Cumberland needed a light. We've talked about having Mr. Hall, having them come out again and do the Cumberland traffic study. Maybe the 3rd time might be the charm with that. And then also with discussions of the Cumberland Drive neighborhood, that would potentially, be a reason that we would need a light, and maybe something we could talk to the developer and potentially see if they would be willing to help. So, just an example of if it's a state highway, which 96 and 100, those are main thoroughways, it is not that easy. And we did have to pay towards Cox Pike.
Right.
They did cover it, but to get the nicer light, pole. So it's not as easy as one would think, especially with the state highway, and they're quite expensive, as Will pointed out.
One of the things the state looks at too, besides just the number of traffic, is how many accidents have happened there. And it was, those numbers were really low the last time they did one out by Cox Pike, so that's one consideration they make on it also.
The general public, my wife included, is usually pretty shocked by the level of threshold that it takes to require a signalized intersection. We've got one at the end of the street that I live on. She's like, why can't they not put a light up? I said, there's not anywhere close to the traffic that would warrant a signal here. But it affects us daily, so, you know, you feel like, yeah, a light would help. Another thing that came to mind was, well, how did Walmart get a light? Well, they paid for it. That's how they got a light, just like the city would have to. So that, and generally speaking, Walmart is going to require a light at their intersection no matter what town they're in, and they're going to pay for whatever it costs to get that light there, because they know, right, and they know that they do their research.
Well, and even it goes down to, TDOT can tell us how many an entrance or exit can go, in a restaurant. So it's not like they have to go through the process and get it approved, and they can turn it down and say, no, you can't, you know, have an entrance and an exit. We found that with Taco Bell. They didn't want, multiple, and probably something else, what are you?
We went through the same thing with Publix. At
Yeah.
one time, I think there's about 6 inches down in between the tire store and the fire hall and everything else, and they weren't gonna allow but one. Of course, Publix wasn't gonna come here because one way in, one way out. And that was one of the reasons for this road right here that came up there to give other access and get the business in there. But they absolutely, everybody went down to TDOT and they just said, nope, not gonna do it.
TDOT controls it's their right of way. Well, yes, TDOT controls everything within their right of way. So, and that includes the drainage. So if there's drainage issues within 96 or 100 right of way, then that's TDOT's responsible for that. So any development along the highway that desires to tie into the drainage system that is a part of 100, the approved portions of 100, the curb sections, then they have to get approval and a permit through TDOT to discharge into that system that's within their right of way.
And it's not just commercial.
Oh, no,
Because
not
I
at all.
owned property on 96 and built a house there.
Yep.
And they told me exactly where I had to put my driveway.
They'll tell you exactly where to put your driveway. They'll tell you what size culvert's needed under your driveway and the head walls on each end of that culvert. Whether it's residential, commercial, no matter what it is.
Madam Chairperson, I'd just like Will to clarify one thing before you adjourn for the Planning Commission. You mentioned a second ago about if TDOT done their own study, that they would pay for it. Would that mean that they would pay for the light as well as future maintenance and that type thing if it was their decision to put a light there?
That's not an across-the-board yes. That would involve some negotiation between the city and TDOT.
Okay.
I think you're going to find that the maintenance part of it's probably going to fall back to the city.
Back to the city.
Within the city limits.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Will, on your opinion, do you think, are we selling ourselves short for our level one not going to the first control point? What would be an industry standard or?
Yeah, okay, so that brings up a good point. What do we got?
We don't
6
have-
minutes?
Just, after this question, we'll adjourn.
Okay. So the first paragraph is what is the threshold for requiring a traffic study? And then once that answer is yes or no, then you say, okay, what level of traffic study is required? And that's the second paragraph. There's 3 levels that are defined in your subregs. And really the difference in the 3 levels is level 1 is just the new intersection. Level 2 is the new intersection and any single downstream intersection. And level 3 is the new intersection, 1 and the second downstream intersection. So that's where I think, Brandon, that you're talking about. So yes, the 2 questions that need to be, or issues that need to be looked at maybe in a future workshop is Do we want to lower the threshold for even requiring a traffic study? That's one issue. And then, do we want to adjust the thresholds for when we require level 1, level 2, or level 3? 1,000, level 2 doesn't occur until there's 3,000 average daily trips created. That's a lot of trips. With your current road infrastructure, that may be a little too high. You may desire to lower that to maybe 2,000, 1,500. You may say, you may just do away with level 1 altogether and just make level 2 level 1 and level 3 level 2. And require the next downstream intersection to be assessed.
Is there a way to get current, average daily trips on some of our secondary streets?
Sure.
I think that'd be helpful in the next workshop. I'm working on this. If we had what some of these streets are actually counting today.
We can,
The system is like we have at the park,
what's that?
put a counter system.
Sure.
like we have at the park.
Absolutely.
Well, the state does it every year, seems like.
The state has, they have a few set up that are they're just there, continuously.
Every year there's one on our street for like 2 days or something.
Yeah. But yeah, that's a good, certainly, that helps you see, okay, where do these thresholds relate or correlate to some existing traffic? And we may find that you don't have a road that has more than 2,000 daily trips. I mean, I don't know. Just,
It might be beneficial if we get several years of those that the state has already done them on, where we can see some pre-development on some streets and post-development of some streets
Yeah.
that's got development on.
I pulled them, well, it's been several months, but I pulled Fairviews and looked at them, looked at the historical a little bit. I want to say they had some on Cox and Cumberland,
Yeah, I would think there would be.
and maybe old 96. I don't know, but yeah, we can certainly pull those.
You say old 96, you mean like Farmville Road?
Yeah,
Yeah, there's one there every year.
yeah.
That's where I live on Farmville Road. Every year there's one there for 2 to 24 hours.
Okay, we're going to adjourn for about 10 minutes, so we'll start back about 8 after and start our regular planning commission meeting.